Hello and welcome to Building the Premier Accounting Firm. I'm your host, Roger Knecht, and this podcast is dedicated to helping you, the accounting professional, have the premier accounting firm in your area. It's in this podcast that we address each and every week various topics to help you actually become the leader you need to be. Also addressing topics such as marketing, sales, onboarding clients, client relations, client retention, offering quality accounting services, and so much more. It's in these conversations that I speak with the experts and find out what tips and tricks they suggest and offer to help us be the better leaders that we need to be, and in fact, become the accountrepreneurs we can become. Now, with that being said, I have over 20 years of experience working with various accounting professionals, helping them both start and build their accounting businesses. And it's in that path that not only have I seen success, but I've made some excellent friendships. With that being said, I've got another guest today that I'm excited to invite and introduce to you. It is Trevor Ewen. Now, Trevor happens to be an experienced software engineer and as well a real estate investor. He has an MBA from London Business School and Columbia Business School. He is a Southport Ventures partner and the CEO of Southport Technology Group. He manages a full stack team in clean energy, insurance, finance, and media. Notable engagements include the Morgan Stanley and HBO, Honest Buildings, now Procore, and Black Bear Energy. Now, with that, he's going to have a conversation today about technology and how it impacts you in the firm and running your business. So, Trevor, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Roger. Really appreciate you having me.
Yeah, this is going to be good. So one of the things that I find very interesting is you're not an accountant CPA, you're married to one, but you do a lot of work with accounting firms, and it's particularly in the tech stack arena. So one of the things that I want to talk about here is you see accountants trying to use technology. Where is it that they sometimes make mistakes or, let's say, for example, not use the best practices? Where are we missing the boat?
Sure. So I actually think accountants, to their credit, are actually pretty good with technology, right? There are other parts of a typical operation where you'll find even weaker spots. I think accountants in general tend to get a good system in place, and they tend to want to move forward on the technology. What ends up happening is they've got multivariate needs, which usually just take the form of tons and tons of spreadsheets. So there's a lot of Excel, a lot of Google Sheets flying around. And eventually what's happening is you've got complex workflows. Your assistants, everybody in the firm is working on a lot of processes that are just kind of hand-baked. So at that moment, I would say it's time to step back and reevaluate. Could we actually, this is such a part of our process. Could we actually standardize this, maybe even build a system around it? That's usually the place where we would step in and start talking to accounting firms. And the other people we'd work with would just be CFOs of companies, just general businesses that have accounting needs going on inside the business, and then also private equity groups where they're rolling up the financial reporting position up to a top-level admin.
Interesting. Now, when you gave that description a moment ago, I can definitely relate with the Google Sheets, the Excel sheets. One of the things that I think is very true is using those types of things. We tend to all create our own workflows, experiences, processes. And one of the things that takes place naturally in business is each employee then does the same. They create their own little processes and systems. And so you've got these siloed experiences happening in the firm. Obviously, everyone's kind of doing their own thing. They're getting their jobs done, but the processes they're doing, they're over the years pretty refined, but they're siloed and independent from one another. You have an excellent opportunity to come in and build software rather than having them purchase a platform or a solution, but build based on this in-house expertise of how to best do the job, a proprietary type experience. Isn't that right?
Yeah, that's what we would do. And there's kind of a thin line in which we would be on either side of the line, depending on the situation. I talked to a guy who runs an accounting firm recently, and just doing some business development, but also networking. And he said, "Well, I'm completely allergic to building custom software." And I said, "Well, you probably should be. It's expensive. It's hard to maintain." And the big thing we advocate is we figure that you can get 90, maybe 80 to 90, depending on what you're doing, % of things done with software off the shelf. You should absolutely not try and rebuild QuickBooks or rebuild some kind of accounting system. But what's going to happen is there's always going to be this last 8 to 10% of tasks that are just, you got the person for that. Jerry always runs that report every week. And at one point in the business, that was what Jerry did on Monday afternoon. As the business grows, you're lucky enough to have Jerry do that 4 days a week, 5 days a week. All of a sudden, you've got a guy whose entire job is just running this singular operation. And it's pretty standardized, but it is also specific to your workflow, specific to your firm. And that's the point at which we see a huge opportunity, and we will come in and say, let's just take that off of his plate. And it's not that he, loses his job or something, right? He just goes to do something else more productive in the firm. And then you've got some automation running that kind of process. So we will often do client development where someone comes in the door and says, oh, we've got no tech whatsoever. And I say, great, check out Capterra, G2, go look at some of these systems, figure out which one's best for you. Come to us when you've got 90% of the tech you want. And then that last 10% needs to get done. And we'll tend to find a better companion customer, if you will, in the firms that already have a lot of this in place and are starting to think in terms of a process orientation, standardizing that and then getting it off people's plates. The other advantage of that is they can really put a number on it, right? So, Jerry makes a certain amount of money a year. If he spends his entire year doing that process, then we know exactly how much this build out saves us per year.
Yeah. I'm old enough that I have done this twice in my career, and it's technically more than twice, but two huge projects where we were literally taking a paper process, something that honestly was moving paper from one file to another file, and it was a system that was made up of hanging files, manila folders, and so forth, and taking that and automating it, going through the process of doing a whole bunch of if-then clauses and trying to figure out what can we do to systemize this, to put it into a computer environment and go paperless. And in both instances, it took longer than we expected. It was expensive, like you mentioned, but it honestly made things a lot easier. Now, here at Universal Accounting, that was done here. When I first started, there were sheets of paper and index cards that we used for this particular process. And today, what's fascinating to me is the terminology we use internally within the company goes back to that paper experience. And yet, if you hired onto the business today, you wouldn't even have the context of why it's called those things, why we refer to that process or that step in that way. And it's simply because of what that paper experience was. So I kind of take what you're doing and make it akin to that. So is that a good illustration of what it is you're sometimes experiencing?
Yes, absolutely. And I think if we can get that, that paper to digital transformation, that is a very big win, because they just see that on kind of two levels. A lot more firms that we're dealing with now are sophisticated enough to have removed a lot of the paper processes.
Oh, of course. That's why I said I'm old. That was a long time ago.
I mean, don't worry about it. Our first and one of our biggest customers, they're not in accounting at all, although of course they have an accounting function in their business. They're an auto insurer, but we did replace a paper process for them, and that was huge. We have a case study about it on our site. Very big transformation. I mean, you can imagine they were dealing with a cycle of paper that involved their auto dealers sending them sheets of paper with carbon copies in the back, doing the wet signature thing, dealing with mail, all this kind of inbound. All that's gone now, right? So they're doing, instant contract rating and then digital signatures. And that helped them expand massively. So they were able to just up the number of markets they're working in because the overhead goes down. I mean, that's a pretty rare case as we see it now, because, like I said, a lot of the people I engage with already have pretty good spreadsheet process. And that probably says a bit more about the way the world has gone. But then we're still pretty instrumental in that second act, trying to say, okay, how much is this still costing you? You've got one person, maybe two people entirely allocated to this process. The other advantage is just you could actually get a different level of quality control, right? If someone's not manually doing these things, if a consistent systemic process is always doing it, you can actually go a little more down market in terms of the kind of people you could expect to do it. Something you might have a CPA look at on a report could be done with the tax assistant or something like that. So we try and put those ideas in front of people to say, you're looking at this bill, you're looking at our estimate, which, by the way, is usually pretty competitive. One of the reasons we like this part of the market is almost nobody else plays in this part of the market.
Yeah.
We have almost zero competitive bids. So we're usually decent, but it's still relative to the high cost of building completely custom platforms, it's pretty good, but it still is a bit of a shocker sometimes for people who haven't done anything like this.
Well, like I said, having done this multiple times, 2 times specifically, but associated with that multiple other, it's not cheap. It does take time. But the one thing that I would emphasize, though, and I'm truly emphasizing this, is in the accounting space, one of the things that we want to look at is when building our companies, we've got to realize that we really don't own the clients. I mean, there's less value there. The value really comes in the processes and systems that we've created within the company, particularly those that are proprietary. And if you have, because of any niching that you're doing or because of the processes that you're creating within your company, the opportunity to automate them, and more importantly, build something that has internal value, you're exponentially increasing the worth of your company. And so if you're uniquely working with clients or industries in a way that you can now systematize it and go through, like we're discussing with Trevor, this process of now building this system even more intricately, all of a sudden the value of your business goes up dramatically simply because you have something that's so unique. So that's the context that I see this in. But at the same time, knowing this is also helpful for all the clients that we have. Many a times the business client, they're not aware that this is still something that can be done, and it'd be nice to be able to introduce them to it. So where's a good place in the accounting operations to look for potential technology solutions?
Yeah, so it would be good to just get your staff together and say, hey, what are you spending a lot of time on? And they may say something that is just, yeah, you're going to spend a lot of time on that, right? There may be a really complicated tax situation that involves income from multiple countries and a whole lot of businesses. And, a one-off situation like that is obviously not what we're focused on. And there's so much tax software to deal with something like that. But you will start to see patterns on people saying, man, I've just got this report I have to run at the end of every month, and then I got to send it to 30 different people who requested it. And, I need to do some error checking on it and make sure it matches with what's in this other system. And all of a sudden you're going to say, wait, you're doing that continually over and over again in pretty much the exact same way. Of course, the numbers are changing, right? But the process itself is not. I mean, that's on the money for a place you should look. Other things we see a lot are when you're dealing with a legacy system that just does not play super nice. We actually see this more in the legal sphere, but I think it's useful for accountants as well. So they have to deal with a lot of federal government or state government systems, and these things are just fossils, right? So they'll spend a lot of time just, my assistant, spends half the year downloading documents, right? Okay, no reason to do that. We can just have a process sit in the back, log in for you and download the documents, put them right in your file store, email them to the associates or the attorneys, right? Whatever that thing is. So when I do the initial conversation or audit with people, I'm really trying to focus on those things. I'm saying, where in the workflow are you feel like you're just wasting time? And of course it delivers value on the tail end. I'm not saying just pure waste of time that you just want to get rid of altogether, but something that, specific to you, specific to your firm, something that you do that's really great, that is kind of a repeatable process. You're wasting time, you're utilizing a resource. If we can put a number on that, that's great. Usually when there is an assistant or someone who's paid to do this work, we can put a number on it. Sometimes it's more outbound focused. So we will do some things that are a bit more maybe on the sales or automation side. So in those situations, you're going to put the number on the other side, right? Like just figure out what is it actually getting for you in terms of new customer inquiries. And, some things are just, they're just force multipliers in terms of what you can do with them. So one example would be we work with a private equity group, and this has been one of our bigger accounting projects where they're going into each of their firms and they are taking out the old accounting system and putting in their standard one, and then putting in all their standard payroll process, right? So now they can get whatever it is, the portfolio of 10 companies, all running the exact same payroll process, reporting. These companies are in Australia, so they have a very kind of strict demarcation of how hourly wages work there. And so employees can enter in one system. Our system makes sure that gets into the accounting system for each of the firms and then sends reporting up to the central office as well, right? So making sure that they can get everything they need. And they're getting a really nice, clean look at the entirety of their business while still implementing the exact same process on each one. It goes back to what you said earlier about, the customers aren't the only value of the business. It's a lot of the systems and process. If this PE group decides to unwind any of these businesses, they're going to sell a unit that has a fully functioning accounting system that is independent of the mothership, but also is additive when connected to the mothership because they're getting the reporting up there.
Yeah.
So those are a lot of the different looks we get. That's kind of like a growth-oriented one. A lot is just, hey, get rid of this process. And then there's stuff that's maybe a little bit more speculative. Hey, I want a new customer portal that that allows them to see more information, more documents, allows me to control access. That's when we get into the realm of helping people build some UIs and some more experiences for their customers, which is probably the rarer side of what we do, but still something that happens.
Yeah. One of the things that I think is so helpful is, and I'm just going to give credit to the accounting professional at this point, there's a lot of genius out there as to accounting professionals that have done their job for so many years. They've gotten the experience and they created more or less a Band-Aid, a system, a process to address a need. And what I'd like my listeners to understand is accounting for hundreds of years was done on paper. It was the Sage accountant, the Xero accountant. It was the Intuit QuickBooks accountant. It's somebody taking that paper process and saying, let's try and automate this. Let's try and actually simplify it. So rather than actually having to do all the mathematical calculations to come up with a P&L or do a balance sheet and taking a day or so to create it, we now just put begin date, end date with that date range, produce a P&L, and we can do comparative reports and so forth because someone's taken the time to do all the programming. So a lot of this starts with just basically processes and then becomes automated. And the thing that I'd like to just bring to everyone's attention that's listening is you may likewise have the same genius for any of the software applications that you're seeing that exist out there today, the HubSpot, the T-Sheets, the Keeper, the Bot Keeper, name it. It's at first an idea. At first, it's a pain, a process that someone's probably created that's manual, that they're realizing we can do this in-house better. And then the epiphany is, if it really made that big of a difference for our business, why don't we now offer it to other firms? Why don't we take it outside to other accounting businesses? And lo and behold, you've got now a business where people are paying for a product that was created to solve a problem that you were experiencing. So with that said, Trevor, what advice do you have to someone who has an idea, and what would a conversation with you sound like?
Sure. So that is, we call that case-induced demand, right? So you are the beta case for the product you may want to build, right? And that really is, I think that really is the most sophisticated version of a customer that we get. In part, it's maybe because they're going to end up paying us the most money and working with us for the longest. But it is a cool level to evolve to. And one we're having right now, it's not in accounting, but I do see a lot of similarities in the legal business. So we work with it's a plaintiff employment law firm in Arkansas, and they are just they're a machine as a business. They're really cool business, and I think they work in a way like a lot of accounting firms would, which is they focus on one particular thing, like the way a tax firm might, right? Just really focus on volume, get so good at this thing that everyone trusts you for it. And theirs is just plaintiff employment law, almost anywhere in the U.S., mostly focused in the Southeast, but they've been growing. And we built a system for them that was a lot like what we said, kind of earlier in the conversation. They have a workflow. They're paying their assistants, 8 months of the year to deal with this workflow, which is just going and downloading documents from the federal government system. And so we just kind of eliminated that problem for them. Talk more about the specifics if you like, but the gist of it is just our program will go in, get all the documents they're looking for on their pending and open cases, make sure they get updated in their document archive, make sure they get emailed to the attorneys, the assistants, etc. Like everyone's getting everything they need. They're not paying any extra money to do it. The assistant now gets to work on other stuff. So they came back to us after that had been just successfully running for 8 or 9 months and said, hey, we want to build the platform to manage our referrals. And we actually think this is more of a platform kind of opportunity. And we actually just launched that. It's called Lexamica. And it's a platform, two-sided transaction market maker, if you will, for law firms who want to send referrals one to another, which is a very common thing because law firms all specialize in niches, right? And you can imagine, let's take the accounting example. If you have a bookkeeping firm and you don't do tax, you're more than likely going to have a tax partner, right? Because how many of your customers are going to come in and say, hey, can you help me with my taxes? And you're going to say, no, but here's our tax partner. And of course, vice versa, the tax partner is going to be sending work to you.
Yeah.
And then the truth is, as that gets more and more complicated, you just need a good way to manage that, make sure you get the updates on it. So that is what they're doing. I mean, they incorporated an entirely new entity. They're building out a product. And like I said, that's the most sophisticated end of what they could get to with us. I will say the vast majority of our customers tend not to get to that point, and that's also okay too. Like one of the things we recognize about our customer base is most of them probably never want to or need to have software developers on staff. And so the way we offer our builds to them too is more like an MSP or a managed service provider. We kind of know that. And so we just manage the infrastructure. They do pay quarterly, but it's low. It's rock bottom compared to anything I've ever seen in the industry in terms of quarterly fees for management. And we're just taking care of everything, right? We're making sure the databases are backed up. We're making sure that, we have uptime monitoring in place, an on-call schedule, all these things. So we are like an accounting firm in that we know that our customers are not experts in what we do. And so we're just going to take care of it for them, right? Uh-huh. And I think that has been a weird spot in our industry because a lot of people are very project oriented. So they kind of like build all this maybe $100,000 worth of IP for you and then drop it off at your door. And you're thinking, okay, now what do I do? Right. And that's often the situation you see. You'll see this in acquisitions, or if you're working with an older business and say, yeah, somebody built a custom system for us 15 years ago and like it hasn't been updated since. So we want to fight against that model. We want to make sure our people are supported if they need it. And then for the ones who go to this next level and do the product development, we also let them graduate. Like eventually they are going to, if it takes off, they're going to need to hire their own staff. And so we'll do the same thing for them to just make it easy and say, hey, you guys are now at the point where your invoice value is outpacing what it would cost to hire 1 to 2 staff to just build this thing for you. Uh-huh. So you probably need to get that going. We'll make that transition easy. You own all the IP anyway. And then you're off to the races, which I'm pretty sure is what's going to happen with Lexamica, the referral platform, in about a year, because it's just going to get, if it is successful, it's going to get too much activity to be reliant on a vendor, and they should obviously be bringing in their own staff.
Yeah. Okay. Now, what makes an accountant a difficult or tough customer for you?
Well, I think accountants are smart. So they'll negotiate hard on price, and I think that's well warranted. But that can be tough sometimes too. We suffer from one of the same problems that a lot of accountants do, which is it's hard to explain every little thing about what we do. And so sometimes it can feel like you're paying for some black magic. I try and outline it as much as possible, really give our customers some agency in what they're choosing to get. Say, hey, if you don't want email notifications for this feature, that's fine. You can take it away, right? And then we just don't build that thing, and it's available later. So I think I have to go to the mat a little bit more with them on the negotiations, and I say that respectfully. But I think accountants are very cost minded, so that can come up a lot.
Yeah, that would be a natural characteristic, I'm sure. So here's something that's interesting. Is there a way to determine whether or not a process is ready to be automated? And what I'm really asking is, there's a lot of things that we all are doing that are manual processes. Maybe there's not enough of them. They're too few, but they're redundant regardless. Maybe I'm doing something, but it's not critical to my work. It's more habitual in the sense that it's just the way I like to do it. I mean, is there some criteria that says, hey, maybe you ought to look at taking this process you've defined and developed and now automating it? or is there kind of a litmus test?
Well, I definitely think a good place to start is if you've delegated it to somebody in sort of an SOP manner, and especially somebody more junior, right?
Uh-huh.
Which is usually the case with delegation. Every now and then it's not, but that is usually a good sign. If you're able to write up what the steps are and expect someone new to this to do it, that means you have a defined process.
Yep.
The other thing we do a lot, and I do this at the estimate level, which means before any money has changed hands, I work on flowcharts with people,
Yep.
which are just the decision tree style, the very simple,
Yes.
Yes, no at the diamond kind of thing.
Yep. If thens type things. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm a big believer in making sure we get that rock solid before we get started. And a big part of that is just so we don't know what we don't know. I mean, when we get in the biggest trouble is when somebody just reveals something at the ninth hour, right? And just, oh yeah, we were supposed to send that email to the customer, immediately once the job starts processing, or something like that. That's just wasn't spec'd out. So we do a lot of that flowcharts early on, and I think if I got to an operation with somebody and they really could not flowchart it out, I'd say, okay, you might want to hone this process a little bit more.
Yeah. What you described there is scope creep. So scope creep is a very common thing that happens. It's natural, but the more you can avoid it, the better. The other thing that I'd comment on is, having done this with a few clients, is the easiest way to define this. Gerber did a great job in eMyth where he talks about the steps, but it's once you can document what's going on, you take what's in your mind, you're able to document it. And as you said, come up with the SOP, the standard operating procedures. All of a sudden, you're getting this flow chart. And once the steps become abundantly clear and you start to remove the exceptions, all of a sudden what you have here, you can now automate. And there's processes that can be done that can kind of push things through, accelerate things through, basically make it so it's more manageable. And ultimately what you're doing is delegating. That's the whole idea of where we're going here, is we're trying to get this off of your plate. And whether it's creating it so it can be automated within a system or delegated to another person, either way, it's no longer you doing something that you do repetitively. So you've taken the time and with your experience to find something that is needing to be done. You see the importance of it. And what we're trying to do is take it to another level so that it can now be documented and duplicated and perhaps delegated. How's that as an assessment?
I think that's great. I would say just don't hesitate. Everyone's busy. And so you can come to me, come to us with a half-baked problem. But you can, as long as you can articulate what the problem is, we can actually get to work on the concepting with it. And I do think there is some value to, particularly we will often get a call from an owner of a business, but the person we really need to work with is someone farther down in the organization.
Mm-hmm.
So, task them with that, right? Like get that going. And then we can start out on the process with them, obviously review it before we're done, especially because you're going to be paying the bill. But, let them work with us to figure out what this process actually looks like. If there's a there, I get through enough, estimation or valuation processes where I say, you're not going to save a ton of time. You're still going to be uploading spreadsheets left and right. I think you just keep it as it is. Big, accelerant that we like to take advantage of. And I think, this, especially for a smaller business audience, is just a good thing to make people aware of. A lot of the software you already have has APIs sticking out of the side of them.
Yes.
And you probably are not knowingly using them. You may use them for something that integrates with it, but that's not knowingly using it because you're just buying the integration. You don't realize it's using the API. But that API is like an open socket on the edge of your accounting system that we can plug a lot of things into, right? So reporting is the classic example, but we can also put a lot of information into the system. And it is okay from the perspective of a non-technical person to say, I don't quite know what the API does, but if it could do this for me, that would be great. And then we look and we check out the documentation. I mean, the truth is it's a mixed bag. Some are really evolved and some are a lot weaker. And we'll just tell you the truth. We won't, try and fake it. At the end of the day, there's always the kind of break glass in case of needing automation is the CSV option, right? Where you have CSV exports act as one end of the transaction. And then there's some middleware server that we put up there. And then at the other end, you also get another CSV that has all the other stuff you wanted on it.
Yeah, so just for my listeners, just to kind of put a little bit more clarity into this, what's being described is you've got data, first name, last name in fields, and we're trying to get that information into another software application, or it's taking it from like an Excel document and putting it into a software application. And so what you do is you map it. You basically say, first name field, whatever's in that field goes in this first name field, and you're basically saying these two are associated. So if anything's in the one, put it in the other. And then you're doing something like a Zapier interface to where you're now trying to push it from one into the other. This type of thing is just basically using, like you were describing, the API. It's that open door where the software is saying, hey, if you want to put data in, rather than doing it manually, just push it through this door. And all of a sudden, the process that you're describing is automated, and what we have recorded over here instantly starts appearing over in the other platform. And is that a good simplistic way of describing that?
Absolutely, right. So here's an example of one that you could think of that's really super simple, right? But you can imagine, man, customers keep emailing me things, and what I really want to have happen is I want those emails to be added to the customer file inside of our accounting system, or maybe inside of a CRM, right? We could set up an email watcher that just watching says, hey, is this email a customer of mine? It does that by pulling all the customers from the API. If so, it's going to attach that email into some kind of comment field or wherever you want it to live, like in some kind of communications column inside your CRM or inside the accounting system, right? So that's another way to think about it, is like really simple things that you struggle to make the link, because email is such a like Swiss Army knife for almost everybody, right? It's just the way that people are just reaching out if they need something, but yet you want maybe your associates or the people actually working on those tax returns to get that information right away, even though they're emailing the head of the firm. That would be something you could look at doing, right? And that's like a pretty simplistic automation that just says, we watch for emails. Email's a customer of ours. We take that email, we shove it on the record.
Perfect. Good illustration. I appreciate it. All right. So this is the next question. Then I'm going to start wrapping this up. You've been doing this for some time. What is the most misunderstood thing about what it is you do that people just don't understand? What's that misunderstanding that we have?
Well, I think it's probably that we're more. I think myths about technology have really pervaded I'll say particularly the American landscape and psychology, but I think even internationally, right? So on one hand, there's this kind of, I guess you could say, like SpaceX, very forward-looking technology that's just purely about the future. Like, we don't even think about accounting. We don't do anything. On the other hand, there is a lot of very just bad legacy systems that people deal with all the time. I mean, obviously, you think about government systems. If you work in a big company, you probably deal with some accounting system that you're wondering why they chose it. And there's a lot of despair on the side of the people who are working with those old systems, and a lot of optimism on the kind of new but also frontier minded. And I think there is a middle ground that a lot of accountants and law firms and other people we work with sit in, which is just, you kind of want stuff to work. You want it to be work quickly. You want it to be, reasonably cheap. I mean, the big cost now for us is labor, right? And that unfortunately is still very high in our industry. And there are ways to mitigate that slightly, but it's not gotten any better over the last couple of years. But the thing that has gone down is the cost of like having your servers and your infrastructure and having everything in the cloud and a lot of the APIs you have available to you. I mean, that has just hit the floor, right? So I think anyone who's done software implementations kind of in the older mindset, and maybe some of what you were referring to, Roger, about your earlier projects, they may also have memories of like just infrastructure and other costs spiraling out of control. And I'm just here to say that's not really the case anymore. The labor is still big, and you will pay a big fixed cost to get things set up initially. But I think our customers are regularly surprised at how little they would pay to get, just modifications, tweaks, new features once they have a system up and running.
So as you were describing that, I was being reminded of some other things. So I've been with this company for over 20 years, and I've been president for 8. And as you're describing that, I'm remembering we used to have in-house a server. It was, I think if I remember right, when we purchased our first server, I think it was $20,000. We had in-house an IT team. So we had a few employees that were IT, that were programmers and such. We had written our own CRM from scratch, created the CRM. From that, we created an auto dialer that was also integrated into the CRM, and it was maintained on the server. So we had our client relationship management system that we were building and maintaining with the server. We obviously had to deal with the server related issues. I mean, you're the flashbacks that you're giving me and of all the pains and frustrations associated with managing all that in-house is incredible, because like you said, it's hit the floor at this point. I no longer have a server. I don't have to worry about any of that. And everything right now is on the cloud. I'm using third-party applications to actually manage these types of things now. It's just incredible how much more simplistic it is. And they're responsible for whether or not the access points are encrypted and whether or not the data is secure. I don't have to worry about that stuff anymore. And it's a huge relief. So thank you for that memory of how much better it is today than it was literally 10 years ago. It was a totally different world for me. And just to give it some context, when we moved from our previous office location to where we are now, the biggest element of the move was the server room. The server room was the biggest thing. Do we keep it where it is? Do we move it? We ended up leaving it where it was for a few years simply because of, if we took it down, it meant that our whole company was down for that period of time. And it was the fear of setting it back up, and you had IP address issues and, dedicated IPs and would they connect? I mean, there was just this big fear. It felt like our mini year 2000 kind of a scenario, when you turn the server back on, is it going to actually load up and
yes.
work? I mean, there were just crazy things going on. Fortunately, I don't have to deal with any of that anymore, and I'm very grateful for that. But yeah, what you're describing is something I've truly experienced. And the thing that I'd want to do is just bring this full circle for the accounting professional to realize, one, you're probably doing things internally that could be automated and honestly could be proprietary and bring value to your business in the end. And ultimately, if it's really good, you might be able to repurpose and sell that to other firms that might see the same value. And that's huge, very huge. What's a question, Trevor, that I should have asked at this point that I haven't asked yet?
Well, I guess you didn't. You said what's difficult to work with accountants, but I would have, you could have said, what do you like about accountants? I mean, I am married to a CPA, so I guess there's that aspect. I fell in love, but I think accountants are great customers, and maybe part of this is that I've been on. As I get older, I'm realizing I'm just more on that kind of operations side of the, all the businesses I'm in. I'm very focused on the, what did we actually do? Not always what are the sales guys projecting.
Yep.
And, just kind of having that more small C conservative mindset when it comes to business decision-making, always running profitably. And so I think accountants and I are kindred spirits in that way. And one of the things I do like is just the ability to run good forensics and analysis on what is actually going on, which is pretty much the whole aspect of accounting. And I think that makes for an easier discussion, because a lot of times the people I deal with, say on, the front office side, they're very ambitious, but they often don't know where to start. And that could be really tough to just, pull a project. And, every journey starts with a single step. And I think that's a big part of what we emphasize here is you have a $500,000 platform in your head that sounds amazing. What do you think about spending $20,000 on the first step that will actually improve your workflows today? And I think accountants get to that a lot quicker. And so I think it's a really good mentality to work with. And it's probably why I seek it out and why we can just have more constructive conversations. And I think that's part of it. Like I am genuinely interested in people's businesses and how they're running their firms. The guy I mentioned earlier, who said he was allergic to custom software, he's not doing any work with us, but I think we're going to keep talking because he's an interesting guy. He's doing some of his own consulting, and there may be an opportunity for him to refer more people to us. And I think a big part of that is just once we both understood each other a little better, we realized, there are some more similarities here, some kindred spirits, some of the ways we run our businesses. So I just want to send that out to your audience. I'm not something to be afraid of in the heavy sell sense, or even in the not really understanding their work sense. I would say this is the most normal crowd for me to be in.
Perfect. So I'm going to switch gears on you. I'm going to ask you something a little bit more off topic. Tell me something that you're grateful for in your life.
Well, I'm grateful for I have a happy and healthy family. So I honestly I can't argue with that one too much. We had a meeting with somebody last night it was 2 nights ago. After dinner, his daughter had a seizure. Turns out it was not a big problem. It was, I guess there's some pretty common ones. God knows I would have been flying off the handle if my 1-year-old daughter had been having a seizure. But so he's all good. But in that moment, he just called us that night. He was at the hospital till 2 a.m. And it was just that flashpoint of realizing, like, man, I'm so lucky. I'm not dealing with any of this. So I've got 3 kids, and they're all happy and healthy right now. So I can't really argue with that as being a top one.
Very good. So because you brought up your children, what part of being a parent changed you? What's changed about you because you're now a parent?
Wow. I guess I'm a longer term thinker. I probably always was a bit more of a long term thinker, but when I do things that are maybe a bit more risk on, I'm thinking a lot more about how they affect a couple other people too. Of course, I always had my spouse, but because she works as well, there's a sense of just she can make her way if we did something really risky, and not that we were ever that risk on, but I think just now the level of decision making brings into question, okay, who else is actually dependent on you?
Yeah.
And I think it just moderates you a bit.
Very true. What is it that you dream for your children? What's something that you hope as you look in their eyes, they'll be able to experience?
In many ways, I hope they have a lot of the same experiences we do, fulfilling career. I want them, if they want to have children as well. And I think that would be great. It's easy in the podcast realm and in the media to just bandy on about the world's problems, but just in terms of the history of humanity, I have a pretty great life, and I wouldn't mind if my kids, got to experience something similar.
Thank you. What do you like about your job?
I like solving problems. I love working with my team. I like training people, mentoring them up has been a big part of what I do, and it's one of those things where there's the old saying, you shouldn't do what you think you're great at. You should do what other people think you're great at. And I think training was one of those examples. I never once, when I was in undergrad or before I started my career, did I say, like, I really want to train people or, get them better at their job or more refined. But then I would always, every single job I ever had, and of course now it's even more relevant, I would just always find myself around all the junior people with, just a crowd always coming to me for advice and support, questions. I think part of it is that I don't tend to, at least in the business context, don't tend to talk in absolutes so much.
Mm-hmm.
I kind of have that old economist thing on the one hand, on the other hand, which, could be aggravating. But I think for people who are making their way, to me, it's better than being dogmatic, right? Because you could say, hey, listen, there's 2 ways to solve this problem. I can tell you the merits of both. What do you think? And it kind of brings them in. And it's always been the way I've tried to train and build people.
Very good. I've really enjoyed our conversation. Trevor, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and summarize what I felt we've discussed. And before I do so, share an offer and then come back to you and see if there is a closing thought that you have. But let me start with the offer. First of all, the thing here that I think everyone needs to realize is if you've got an idea, you've got a thing that you feel could be automated or improved in the processes that you have, or if you just have a great idea, like he mentioned, that could really be revolutionizing to the accounting profession, by all means, reach out and speak with Trevor and his team. Business owners can actually book a 30-minute virtual coffee with a member of his team by going to the episode description, and in the description, take advantage of the link that's found there. Now, it is a free one. He'll actually send you a Starbucks Starbucks gift card to do a quick technical survey of your business. And then after the call, he'll actually compile the information to a free report and send it back to you. So definitely something worth exploring and seeing what it is that you might actually have that's genius in your own mind and seeing where that may go. The other thing you can find in the episode description is we too have created a proprietary software. We found that benchmarking when working with our clients was such an integral part of what the accounting process should include. And if you're familiar with benchmarking, it's a powerful way of taking the financial reports that you have for the client and comparing them to their industry standards, those numbers that are basically going on in the business that are based on NAICS code. Now, using that, you're literally now taking the business and comparing them to their competitor and seeing how they compare in that space. And with the reports that are produced by BizBench, literally get actionable items that you can implement in your client's business to move more towards being in the top 10% of their industry, if not better. So check out this offer of going and speaking with Trevor and his team to see what you can maybe develop yourself, as well as check out BizBench and see what you can do to actually leverage this as part of your services, perhaps even stepping into the advisory role using this tool to help complement the work that you're doing with the clients that you're servicing today. Now, as a summary of our conversation, I was excited about this conversation with Trevor because I've definitely experienced this on numerous occasions, having this moment of, I've got a process, I've got a system, there's got to be some way to at least make this more efficient or systemized and perhaps even automated. And going through that process has really been quite revolutionary in the business because not only does it simplify things, but it does allow it to be delegated a lot easier, trained to someone, and most importantly, becomes an integral part of the valuation of the business. It's proprietary, it's unique, and I encourage you to actually find out a little bit more about that. The second thing that I was really excited about in our conversation is he was able to simplify what that process looks like. How would you go about this? And he storyboarded out in an illustration for us what that looks like is as to whether or not you're ready to then automate this. And he made it also, I think, very palatable to say it doesn't have to be this monumental, daunting thing that we do. It can be done in chunks. And actually speaking with someone like Trevor allows us to maybe figure out what are the costs associated with maybe automating or creating this. So I felt that was a helpful conversation because honestly, I know a lot of you that are listening have ideas of things that could be done differently or better than perhaps the services you're currently using by someone else. And being that you're in the business doing it day by day, you in fact may have a better way that can be created and developed that would not only benefit your business, but maybe the industry as a whole. And so I invite you to be open to that idea. And maybe you'll be the next one that's at a conference with a vendor booth sharing something that's new in the technology space that can really revolutionize what we do in the accounting world. So with that, what final thought do you have, Trevor?
We didn't get to talk about this as much, but I think it's a good place to close. So we have another side of the business, Southport Ventures, which you mentioned at the top. And that side is more the day-to-day focus of my partner. And we are working on acquiring software firms, small software firms kind of like ours. And the number one thing we see that is a huge problem is just really bad bookkeeping, really bad accounting. And also being in that world, we're very involved in the kind of the SME, SMB acquisition space. So there's people buying more than software companies. We know folks buying HVAC companies, plumbing businesses. There's people buying accounting firms, believe it or not. Although the accounting firms tend to have pretty good books. But the number one thing we see that is a problem is really bad books. Going all the way from the range of, we actually think, somebody here is committing fraud, to just everything's messy. We're getting emailed a bunch of statements from the CPA, not even like a bookkeeper. And I wanted to leave you on this thought because there is no more professional, more in demand than a decent principle-minded accountant, whether it's a CPA or bookkeeper or controller. Actually, a lot of the biggest issues we see are on the side of the controller. So for all your listeners, I think if you're ever wondering if there's a lot of need out there, my answer is yes. We see it every day, and we're rarely ever satisfied with what we see. So, go get it.
I love that. Happy to end on a nice plug for the accounting profession. There's so much demand and need for what we do. There's definitely the legal side. Uncle Sam wants us to account for what's happening to determine our tax liabilities. We definitely get that, file the tax returns and so forth. But literally to run a business profitably, to bring value to it, to give, when you're describing a M&A, you're needing to be able to tell the accounting story to a potential investor, the banker, just basically illustrate using the language of business what's happening in a company, and they're established the worth and the value of what's going on. So well said. I love what you were describing there. So with that, we're going to wrap everything up. Trevor, thanks for being on the show. Obviously, if you like this episode and would like to actually hear many others that we have, definitely subscribe to the podcast. We've got a variety of episodes that we release each and every week so that you can actually receive the information you're needing to have the premier accounting firm in your area. You can also check out a little bit more of what we do by visiting us online. You can go to universalaccounting.com or give us a phone call at 801-265-3777. And with that being said, always remember this: if it's about accounting, it is universal. Do take care, have a great day, and be safe out there.